In our leading story this evening, Eskom Chief Executive Officer Phakamani Hadebe says the decision to offer a 0% wage increase was not taken in isolation. He says the power utility appreciates challenges facing the workers. However, tough decisions had to be made to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, unionized workers, ununionized workers have threatened a complete shutdown from Thursday. And this is if Eskom does not reconsider its 0% wage offer. Eskom confirms that contingency plans have indeed been activated to ensure continuous power supply during the strikes.
We are fully appreciative of the challenges that Eskom employees are facing, and that is why the challenge has been magnified about the events that have taken place now. But we want to reassure South Africans that during this organizational turnaround phase, we need to take tough and courageous decisions. We have confirmed reports of protest actions at several power stations, unfortunately preventing staff from accessing these stations. To ensure that we continue to keep the lights on, we have activated our contingencies, and currently all power stations are operating. Some of them not at full strength, but they are operating. We remain disturbed by the threats of industrial action, and will continue to defend the assets that belong to the states. So any action that will sabotage these assets will be defended. However, I want to emphasize, it is in all our interest to ensure that we resolve this matter as professionally, as amicably as possible.
Meanwhile, the National Energy Regulator has confirmed that Eskom will take its decision on its revenue requirement for a judicial review. Eskom had applied for a 19.9% tariff hike. In subsequent hearings, businesses and the public voiced opposition to its demand for such a large tariff hike. In December, the regulator awarded Eskom an allowable revenue of about 190 billion rand. Eskom had urged, or argued rather, for more than twice of that. NERSA is studying the notice of motion and will decide on the way forward within the time allowed by the High Court. Well, it's over to my colleague Harold for more on this matter.
Again, I'm Harold Bopalamo on Prime Business. This is the time of day when we have discussions with guests about all things business, and tonight we're talking about Eskom. And joining me in the studio is Phakamani Hadebe, NUMSA spokesperson. On the line we have Chris Yeland, energy expert from EE Publishers, and hopefully we'll be joined by Kulu Pasiwe shortly. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
There's a bit of a context to all of this, isn't there? Economic growth declined by 2% in the first quarter of the year. Today, the results on retail performance were not encouraging, at 0.5% growth in retail against expectations of 4.5%. So not a very good picture economically. Against this background, Eskom is requesting increases in tariffs of 19.9% as against what NERSA granted them, 5.3%. At the same time, there's an ongoing protest at Eskom. Workers demanding something better. We're not sure exactly what, in terms of wage increases and what Eskom management is offering, and Eskom management is offering 0%. But the 19.9% increase is against the 5.3% increase. Chris, taking you first in terms of commentary, two thoughts come to mind on this. One is price elasticity of demand, and the other is utility death spiral. Or am I seeing this wrong?
In the first instance, demand for electricity has shown a decline this last year, or this first half of this year, of some 3% compared to the same period last year. And a lot of this can be attributed to the rising price of electricity, which is inhibiting economic growth, as well as encouraging people to use electricity more efficiently, and even to look at alternatives like renewable energy and solar PV as a replacement or at least a supplement to grid supply. And all of this is leading to a reduced sales of kilowatt-hour units by Eskom. And the price increases that Eskom is seeking in taking this matter on review will worsen this situation, cause further reductions in demand, and accelerate this so-called utility death spiral.
And that's quite apart from the possibility that it will also negatively impact economic growth. I mean, one of the reasons given for the poor performance in retail is the fact that we've had a VAT increase and an increase in fuel prices that basically has strained the consumer. And the South African market, the South African economy, is essentially a 60% consumption-based economy. So if the consumer is stressed, growth declines.
That's quite right. And increases in the electricity price have a knock-on effect on inflation. Costs of every single thing that we import, including oil and fuel and all kinds of goods and services that are imported. And so it really accelerates the inflationary position of South Africa.
A 19.9% increase that Eskom is asking for. Has Eskom considered the possibility that this will lead to further declines in consumption of electricity effectively, and you end up in the same place? And on top of that, there's also the inflationary impact on the economy, which also further leads to less electricity consumption.
Yeah, look, of course, Eskom, I'm sure, has considered it, but it sees itself in a position where it is not financially viable for a number of reasons. And is looking to two ways of resolving this matter. Firstly, by keeping costs under control, and particularly salaries and wages, and as well as primary energy, and at the same time trying to increase revenue, and that means putting up the prices. So it's really a case of, to make a profit, you need to reduce costs and increase sales, and that's what they are. That is their strategy.
Kulu, and welcome to the show. What is the status of the discussions with the unions regarding the protests, and what should we expect to see in the next few days or the next couple of weeks?
Well, the ball is now squarely in the hands, or in the court of the unions. Remember, in terms of the law, they are not supposed to go on strike, but the reality is that tomorrow we are going to have a protest there. So from our end, management is going to go there to receive the memorandum of demands, and then I'm sure there will be some kind of a deadline attached to it, and management will respond accordingly. What management also mentioned today is that I suppose what one can call a cold comfort that we have is now that all three unions have taken this matter to the CCMA, where we are hopeful that we'll get a date so that we can ventilate this matter and hopefully come to some kind of a settlement very soon.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that you do need to do something about your operating costs. But what other areas of cost, possible cost cutting are you looking at in addition to this?
Well, Chris has been at pains today, and other people before, essentially trying to pin Phakamani at a corner, basically to say that we're going to cut staff numbers. At this stage, management is saying that we are looking into other things that we have control over without necessarily tampering with the staff numbers. So Phakamani and the management of Eskom, together with the board, are saying it doesn't necessarily imply that we're going to have to cut the staff numbers so that we can have some kind of a huge reduction in our cost structure. The biggest component of our cost is actually primary energy. On average, last year at least, we spent about just over 80 billion rand on coal alone. So clearly that's the way we need to focus our efforts, and that's what management is doing, including the fact that in terms of our I would say investment program for Medupi and Kusile, we are over the next 5 years going to reduce our capex by over 50 billion rand. So clearly those are some of the things that we can do now, but the issue of staff reductions as in retrenchments at this stage is not part of the equation.
That's in spite of the fact that in your last annual report, if I remember correctly, of 2017, there was a specific reference to reducing staff numbers by 12,000 by the year 2022, if I remember correctly.
Well, you're correct. That is what that annual report is saying, to say that from where we are now at around 47,000, the number will go down to just around 36,000 thereabouts. So the management is saying, on average, we have been seeing a staff reduction through natural attrition by around 4% over a period of time. So the expectation is that between now and 2023, we'll continue to see that kind of trajectory, and they are likely to reach that number. But at this stage, the issue of job cuts has not been placed on the table. If it's going to arise at some point, Eskom is going to follow the normal processes of engaging the people who are going to be affected through the unions, and obviously also informing the shareholder and those kind of dynamics. But at this stage, I really would like to place it on record that management have today and other platforms before, they have indicated that this matter is not on the table.
Well, one last question for you, Kulu, before I let you go. The 19.9% increase that you're asking for, in terms of the court case against NERSA, what happens if you don't get that? What does it mean for Eskom? That's the first question. But the second part of the question is, have you considered the impact that it might have on your electricity sales? Because I would imagine conceptually, if you increase your tariffs by that much, sales should come down.
Well, if we do not get any increase at all, if we remain with this 5.2% that we currently have, then clearly it means that Eskom's going concern status cannot be guaranteed. And that's what we say in no uncertain terms in the application that we have sent now to the courts. Ultimately, that will be going through NERSA as well. So we are asking for a fair tariff adjustment. And as a matter of fact, our country, which is through the National Treasury, in 2015, the statement that was at the time read by the then Minister of Finance, who is now back on, which is Mr. Nhlanhla. In 2015, during his budget vote, he said that Eskom needs to migrate its prices to be cost reflective. Currently, within government, there's a realization that our prices actually are not where they should be. So there's a need for us to adjust our prices upwards, and that's where we currently are heading. What we have seen over the last 2 years at least is actually a reduction. And let's decode this 5.2% that we got. Out of the 5.2%, nearly 4% of that is actually amount of tariff adjustment for us to enable us to buy from the renewable energy project, meaning that Eskom effectively has gotten just over 1%. And if this 1% that we are talking about is actually much lower than the 2.2% tariff increase that we had received last year. So clearly we are on a negative trajectory, which is why Eskom is saying we need a fair adjustment on our prices. And you are correct. The issue of price adjustments generally is a turn-off for all of us as electricity users. But for Eskom to remain sustainable, there has to be a way of adjusting its prices to be at least to be cost reflective.
Turning to you, Phakamani, firstly, let's talk about the tariff issue. What is NUMSA's position on Eskom's court challenge of the NERSA position?
Well, first of all, NUMSA did present to NERSA. In fact, we've presented to NERSA on both occasions when they've had public hearings on Eskom's request for a tariff increase. And in both instances, we've rejected that application on the basis that, first of all, the working class majority and the poor in this country cannot afford higher electricity tariffs. I'm listening to Kulu Phasiwe talking about the fact that government believes that the tariff as it is now is too low. But what is the reality facing ordinary South Africans today? The ordinary South Africans cannot afford electricity. And it is strange that this government of ours, which is supposed to care about the working class and the poor, has taken on the narrative of the World Bank and the IMF and all of these international finance institutions, which believe in the commodification of electricity and in high electricity tariffs. That's essentially what they're promoting here. This has got nothing to do with what is good for South Africa. This has got nothing to do with what is good for the working class majority. This is once again the South African government making a decision in the interests of white monopoly capital to increase tariffs for their satisfaction and for the satisfaction of ratings agencies. That's what this is about. And this is precisely what we presented to NERSA. The second argument that we presented to NERSA, especially in this last round of submissions, was the fact that the reason Eskom finds itself in dire financial straits is precisely because of the independent power producer project, which it recklessly entered into because government, of course, as the major shareholder, has forced it to do so. Eskom conceded that IPPs are costing them more than they can afford. Right now, they are able to make electricity for 32 cents per kilowatt hour. And IPPs, if they have to procure electricity through IPPs, it costs up to 2 rand and 14 cents per kilowatt hour. So the question is, who then pays the difference? Obviously, that gets passed on to the consumer, which is precisely why Eskom had to make an application requesting NERSA to bump up its finances. That is completely unacceptable, and this is a process that needs to stop. The other issue that we have a problem with, whilst we've noted the fact that Eskom is taking NERSA to court, our position as NUMSA, precisely with regards to NERSA on this, is the fact that we are worried about how NERSA has handled, particularly the issue of IPPs. As the energy regulator, they should have been the ones to actually insist on public consultation when making the decision in relation to the IPPs. It should not just have been a decision which was made by the energy minister. NERSA never embarked on a process of public consultation and the impact of IPPs, because we now are feeling that impact. In 2016, for example, after that phase of IPPs was introduced onto the grid, that cost Eskom over 9 billion rand in revenue. Kulu even touched on it now when he spoke to you in his interview. He said that the 4% increase that they were granted by NERSA, 5% increase that was granted by NERSA, 4% of that went to the renewable energy project, i.e. the IPPs. So the IPPs are actually draining our resources. And apart from the fact that they're draining our resources, there is the very real threat of the fact that this project, because of the fact that we have now finalized the signing on of these 27 IPPs, there will be the closure of 5 power stations in Mpumalanga, which will result in the loss of at least 92,000 jobs, according to Eskom's own research. So this is reckless management of a state-owned entity, not just by the energy minister and the government, but of course also by the Eskom management itself.
Chris, the reality though, if we'll talk about renewables in a second, but if we just go back to the question of the tariffs and also juxtaposed against the current discussion about wages, and let's forget about the possibility for a second that because of price elasticity, demand will decline. And if you took it theoretically that the tariff increase will lead to revenue increase, and the wage bill does not increase, then the margins for Eskom increase. They generate more cash flow. They're more sustainable. They're better able to service their debt, etc., etc. And obviously, that's what they are thinking. Yes. Right, as to whether it all adds up is another matter, but that is at a basic level what they are thinking is. On the other hand, if they don't get the increase, then they don't get the revenue jump. If they don't hold the wage bill down, then they're back to where they started, where they're unsustainable. Now we're back to the scenario where they're completely dependent on the treasury again. How feasible is it that all of this can be resolved by just resorting to asking the fiscus for more and more support? How realistic is it?
You have to remember that government, fiscus, treasury, actually made a equity injection, that means a cash bailout, of some 80 billion rands about a year or two ago. You may remember stake in Vodacom. Sorry, it sold its stake in Vodacom in order to raise 20 billion rand to provide a cash injection into Eskom. It also converted a 60 billion rand loan to Eskom into equity. That is effectively, another cash injection. So a total of 80 billion. Now, if you don't address the real problem, you're going to have to be injecting another 80 billion and another 80 billion in the years to come. And already Eskom has, is really in a very difficult financial position, is looking to government for further equity injections, but government says no. You need to be self-sustainable. You need to be able to finance your business from operations plus debt. And therein lies the problem. So it cannot just continue that government year after year provide bailouts. Just to come back to the question of renewable energy and its impact on Eskom's cost structure, the CEO of Eskom, Mr. Hadebe, addressed this matter in his media briefing today to say that actually renewable energy is a relatively minor part of Eskom's cost structure. The major part of Eskom's cost structure comprises two main line items. Firstly, primary energy, which is the biggest one. That means largely coal. And we know that there have been serious problems in coal procurement over the last years with state capture. The second biggest cost item in Eskom's cost structure is staff remuneration, salaries and wages. And Eskom staffing is significantly overstaffed, as a World Bank study acknowledged, as well as Eskom's own analysis acknowledges. They are significantly overstaffed, number one. Number two, they are a very highly paid and privileged staff. If you take the total remuneration in Eskom's income statement divided by the number of employees, the average staff remuneration is approximately, across all 47,000 employees, is approximately 650 to 700,000 rands per annum. This puts Eskom amongst the top payers in South Africa, and workers and staff at Eskom are indeed very privileged compared to the rest of the country.
Kulu, clearly in this whole discussion, I mean, it seems we're talking about an entity that really needs a substantial amount of restructuring in order to become sustainable. Surely discussions about wages and tariff increases are not sufficient to address this. What other conversations are going on amongst the directors and at management level at Eskom, or even at policy level, to address this? Because doing the same thing over and over again clearly is not going to lead us anywhere, and that's what it seems we keep doing.
Well, management has been on the record saying that if we continue along this trajectory that we are on, it doesn't matter how much government pumps into Eskom in terms of money. We will continue to come back after every, maybe say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So clearly something has to give within Eskom. So the company has to improve its productivity. We also have to contain our costs and improve efficiencies. Those are the key things that are going to guide us going forward. And also management is now working on a revised corporate plan, a business plan of the company to decide as to what form and what shape the company needs to take going forward. One of the things, speaking about the IPPs, one of the things that management is thinking of, but obviously it will be part of this business plan that we are working on now, which is going to be finalized in September, is what role can Eskom play in the renewable energy space. Currently, we are an off-taker or a buyer of the electricity, which is coming out from the renewables. So management wants Eskom to be part of the players. In other words, when there's another round of bids coming sometime in future, Eskom might actually participate. It does not mean that currently we are not involved necessarily, because as I speak to you now, we do have a wind farm in Cape Town, which is producing just over 100 megawatts. And there are also plans underway to build a solar facility, a CSP, and also another wind farm somewhere in the Northern Cape. Those are smaller things that we are trying to do, but we want to get involved in bigger and grand projects that will happen sometime in future. So in say by September this year, we will have an idea as to how Eskom is going to look like. Today, for example, some of the questions that were being asked was around the top structure of Eskom. Some people believe it is top-heavy, and therefore it needs to be trimmed down. We don't know, at least at this stage, as to how it's going to look like, but obviously management is going to look into all of those dynamics to make sure that Eskom becomes more agile, so that when there are opportunities here in South Africa and elsewhere in the continent, we are able to move with speed so that we can improve our revenue. Because our revenue improvement, that's where the key lies. We need to make sure that we sell more of our product and also contain costs at the same time.
Phakamani, let me come back to you again. I could tell you didn't quite agree with Chris's references to the average wage bill. I'll let you respond to that in a second. But my understanding of the Eskom employee structure is that approximately 40,000 of them are subject to collective bargaining out of the 48,000 odd. If indeed, and mathematically it's true that the average salary is something around 700,000, I mean, it probably isn't 700,000 for the members you represent, but at a simple average level, dividing the wage bill by the number of employees, you get 700,000. So there's employee cost of 700,000. But mathematically, if 40,000 of them are subject to collective bargaining, there must be a substantial number of them that are well paid, surely. Can you tell us what the average salary might be amongst the employees that are under collective bargaining? And where I'm getting to with this is that we're at a time in our history now where we all need to make sacrifices. Taxpayers put money into the fiscus, it goes into Eskom, as Chris was saying, and it's gone there multiple times, it doesn't come back. The money goes in there when it could have been used to build a school or a healthcare center or something. So the other 55 million South Africans are taking a hit out of that. And at the same time, Eskom employees are getting paid regularly and getting increases regularly, and the wage bill goes up and up and up. There has been a benefit, even from the mismanagement, for an Eskom employee. At what point do we say we now all need to just stand back and say, let's consider the 55 million South Africans rather than just our union members?
I think, let me clarify many discrepancies that seem to have arisen from this discussion. First of all, when working out these averages, this process that has been used is completely flawed. The average Eskom worker earns 135,000 Rand per annum. So what these figures that they're talking about are actually a reflection of executive management. Right now, Eskom is top-heavy. Kulu just confirmed it. They are top-heavy. They've got over a team of over 500 executive managers. You do the math. If all of them are earning an average of R1 million pay packages, which is what an executive is expected to earn in this country, certainly not less than 800,000 Rands per annum. So if there are going to be any cuts, then the cuts should start right at the top. Because in 2001, Eskom was led by a team of 80 people. And if you recall, they were running pretty well at that time. So it would make perfect sense that job cuts should take place at executive level, where all of the massive salaries and benefits are actually taking place. That's where top workers are earning money. So it's actually false. And it's a false narrative that we've been dealing with all day from the likes of Chris Yelland and other so-called analysts who claim that our members are earning in excess of 700,000 Rands per annum. If Eskom was to put 700,000 Rands on the table today, I'm telling you there'll be no crisis. Workers would not be threatening to strike as they are at the moment. Secondly, the other thing that I think is very important for me to clarify is that we are not on strike, and tomorrow will not be strike action. Tomorrow is going to be a picket. We've organized pickets nationally at all Eskom plants. Workers want to demonstrate against the fact that Eskom has the nerve to come and offer them nothing. When in fact, the reason the lights are on today is because workers, men and women, are working very hard at Eskom to keep the lights on, despite the shenanigans which are taking place at executive management level. We've had over 10 years of scandals in relation to corruption, scandals in relation to mismanagement, and yet every single day, members of Eskom, workers at Eskom, go to work, do their work, and make sure that the lights stay on. So again, if anybody is to be punished or who must make sacrifices here, it should be the executive management at Eskom. And thirdly, you know, it's very interesting that whenever companies or whenever bosses or employers do well, interestingly enough, and when the economy is doing well, those benefits don't get passed down to workers. Now that everybody is having a tough time, now there's this conversation about how workers must make sacrifices. Well, let's be clear. The working class in this country has been consistently making sacrifices for more than 25 years. Right now, we are being punished through VAT increases. We are being punished through petrol price increases. We are being punished with a transportation system that is not subsidized. All of these things have a major impact on the working lives of our members who work at Eskom. And this is the reason why they are fighting for a 15% wage increase. And frankly, their demands are justifiable when you consider the fact that they are not the ones who've brought the SOE into a crisis. It's the executive management, together with poor decision-making from government, in having approved an IPP project which is already proving to be detrimental to Eskom's balance sheet and also detrimental over in the long term to the fiscus and to job creation in Mpumalanga.
I think we leave it there. Thank you very much, Phakamani. Thank you, Kulu. Thank you, Chris. And good evening.
It is time now for a short break. We're back with the final half an hour of Afro Prime Time after that, so don't miss out on it.